evening, everyone. This is the second of our public meetings with respect to the application in the Chapter 40B of 648 to 652 Canton Avenue in Milton. We met earlier this week and came up with sort of an approach as to how we might go at the issues that are presented by this particular application. And I think we agreed that we would start by going through the list of requested waivers that hopefully would inform us as to or reiterate for us some of the major issues involved in the case. And if that's okay with everyone, Ted, Mike, does that still seem like a good approach to you, that we go through the waivers and we don't have to definitively, decide the waiver issues, but at least have a discussion and open discussion about how we feel about the particular waivers. And just to digress, I guess, my thought is that when we next met, we could either begin to talk directly about whether or not we think we should approve the project, or we could go to conditions that we might impose if we were to approve the project. But we can talk about that at the end of the session. So if that makes sense, I think we can just begin with this list of waivers that Mr. Schomer was nice enough to print out for us. It's dated November 29th, 2021, but I think it's up to date. Does that make sense, guys?
Yep. Sure. I just so you know, I did go back. I had started to make a more comprehensive list of units than the overall primary ones we discussed last week. And I did do a list of, a more complete list of issues, although I'm sure it's not all of the issues, but so.
Ted, if you want to share that with us, and I think that would be helpful.
Well, it's more than 5 pages of double space. Yeah, so I'm happy to, but we can do it at the end if you want, if you feel like we have time. It's up to you.
Why don't you do it now? Because it may inform us a little bit about how we treat some of these waivers.
All right, these are issues that have been raised, and again, they may not be the way somebody else would phrase them, and it's certainly not all of them. But the first one I have is the proposed number of units and the proposed height, size, and footprint of the project are serious concerns. The town, through the planning and select board, and the neighbors believe the proposed project is too massive for the site and the neighborhood and fails to properly integrate with the buildings in the surrounding area. Next, there's not enough open space around the site to create an adequate buffer for neighbors, as there is with respect to other large developments in the town of Milton, which are mentioned in the materials that have been submitted to us. The Milton Historical Commission has indicated there's significant historical value in the home at 648 Canton Avenue, as well as in some of the homes on abutting properties. Serious concerns about storage of materials, staging areas, parking, moving vehicles and equipment, snow removal, and noise on and from the site during construction. And this would be a prolonged period of time given the massive size of the project. According to the planning board, the project should generally conform to the Commonwealth's sustainable development principles embraced by Department of Housing and Community Development, and it does not in certain ways that the planning board has outlined, which I won't go through at this point unless you want me to.
No, we can come back to that.
Okay. There are obviously very serious wetland and stormwater and groundwater issues with respect to the site, and which it is argued would be exacerbated by the proposed massive size of the development, its density, and its footprint. Numerous abutters, neighbors, and downgrading homeowners spoke and sent letters about the flooding they're already experiencing, and there's a significant wetland area on the Geneva property directly in back of and adjacent to the site. The proposal to put in 5 to 9 feet of fill on top of a substantial portion of the site is extreme, and according to some of the testimony, unprecedented, at least in the town of Milton. The proposed buffer and screening along the perimeter of the site, particularly from the portion of the development closest to Mergewood Road, is inadequate to screen the massive buildings that are proposed, as well as noise from the development from surrounding neighbors. There's a serious concern that large and historic trees on the site, as well as trees on neighboring properties close to the property line, will be damaged by the construction process and/or will not survive following the construction because of damage caused by construction activities. Construction traffic needs to be carefully managed and take into account school hours, an already heavy amount of traffic on Canton Avenue during peak hours, and noise and air pollution of neighboring properties. And there are also concerns obviously about traffic once the project is completed, which have been raised as well. Snow removal during the construction project is also a concern. There's an issue whether the stream that crosses 656 Canton Avenue very close to the proposed project and within the buffer zone is intermittent or perennial, and that this determination can seriously affect the proposal. The next one is a little lengthy. The applicant's proposal to import an extreme volume of fill, in addition to exporting soil at the outset and also importing a large volume of sand, gravel, and stone, will raise the grade of the project at some point by 5 feet and at others by 7 to 9 feet above the existing grade. The estimates of the volume of fill range from 30,000 cubic yards, as claimed by the applicant, to approximately 52,000 cubic yards based on calculations provided to the board on behalf of the neighbors. Also, the number of semi-trailer truck trips range from 3,000 based on the applicant's presentation to approximately 6,600 as calculated by witnesses produced by the neighbors, creating up to 30 truckloads or 60 truck trips per day over a period of greater than 5 months, if they were done on consecutive days, I guess. In addition to the traffic issues, noise and disruption to neighbors, this could potentially cause damage to Canton Avenue. The calculation by the neighbors' witnesses, no, that's a different one, sorry. There are serious issues regarding applicants' right to use Mergewood Road for emergency access to the project. This issue must be resolved by a court of competent jurisdiction. There are significant concerns about the groundwater mounding analysis submitted by applicant, including the quality of the data inputted into the model used. The applicant refused requests to share its data files with the town's peer reviewer or the experts who prepared reports and who testified on behalf of the neighbors. I also have sub issues on all of the the witnesses the experts who spoke on behalf of the neighbors who raised issues. But again, I don't have to get into them now. The primary ones that each of them raised. The significant increase in elevation resulting from the fill that would be installed on the property directly affects the view of abutters, effectively making the structures in the proposed development appear 5 to 9 feet taller than the buildings themselves. Getting towards the end here. Trees on abutting properties are close to and overhang the proposed development site such that their root systems extend into the project site. Neighbors and their experts note, as well as the planning board, that these trees are at substantial risk from all of the site work, including the delivery and compaction of fill right up to the property boundary. In addition to the truck trips involved with importing and exporting fill and other materials, it was pointed out that there would be a significant number of concrete trucks needed to pour foundations, several floors, and sidewalks for the 11 buildings proposed on the site. An estimate in one document is that approximately 18 concrete mixers would be required for building 3 alone. Additionally, there would be numerous trips by heavy equipment truckloads required to clear the site and remove those materials as well, adding to the construction traffic. And that's basically it, other than I said, again, as I said, some other specific issues raised by the experts for the neighbors. Well, I guess, yeah, a few conditions raised by by Mr. Reardon as well.
I'm sorry, conditions that would be imposed as a condition to approval?
In this, yeah, actually, in that case, it was a condition to approval. I think they had to do with setbacks of the retaining walls, I believe, from the property line. I'd have to look at it again, but the ones I had written down and listed, they were listed as conditions and not, well, I guess they're issues too. But there were issues raised by Mr. Horsley, Mr. Mobile, and Mr. Chesia that I also wrote down as well. So I don't know whether that's helpful or not. And I'm sure there was such a great volume of materials we received from so many different people that I'm sure I missed some.
I think it's a really good start of the issues, and I think you certainly hit the highlights certainly. I think we all realize that because of the magnitude of the project and the constraints of the site and the issues with water, which has necessitated the import of enormous amounts of fill, that this is a fairly unique problem with a fairly unique set of problems that it will generate, short term and long term. And so I think you've captured those pretty well. And just listing all of those may inform us a little bit as we work our way through these conditions. And I really just meant to discuss them. I don't think we have to necessarily vote on these conditions tonight or these waivers. We're not talking about conditions, but waivers, but just to get a sense of how people feel about them. Have you and Mike both had a chance to read through them today or in the last couple of days?
Yes.
Okay, so we can just go right to the heart of it then. I won't bother with reading them, but just give you sort of a general discussion. So there's actually 10 pages of these waivers, but some of them we can get through fairly quickly and others will require more consideration. And I think, as I said, I think your list of the issues will inform some of the discussion. So the first waiver is a Milton police regulation, which is part of the general bylaws of the town, chapter 6, and it's for curb cuts and sidewalk openings. Typically, you would have to get a permit to break up the sidewalk or to do anything with the street, and the applicant has sought a waiver of that and asked that we, as a board, approve curb cut locations and street sidewalk openings as shown on the plans. Subject to permitting requirements. Ted, Mike, any thoughts on that particular request?
I think the location of the driveway, I believe, was moved to try to interfere with, to avoid interfering with traffic, I think coming from Gulliver Street.
I think that's right.
And I believe the location, I didn't have time to look this up completely because I was doing a lot of reading, but may have been approved by the fire department or one of the town bodies. Although I'm not, maybe you guys remember that.
That's my recollection. I remember
that's mine as well.
Yeah, I mean, there were some concerns about sightlines.
Right, sightlines too.
I don't know if that falls under this this section or not. but obviously we would want the sight lines exiting the property to, to be approved by the fire chief, I think it was. Maybe it wasn't fire chief. I remember that this was discussed, and I think
it was, yeah.
It definitely was, and I remember the discussion that there had been a change to the way the opening would line up with Gulliver Street to avoid a problem of traffic of some sort or another. Just sort of more generally, this particular regulation, I mean, I think it's one of the more difficult ones for us to deal with, but it raises in my own mind sort of a fundamental question about our approach to this, and that is when you have all of these local non-zoning bylaws, I'll just say this out loud. Why wouldn't we just leave it to those local bodies to deal with some of these very specific local bylaw provisions? I mean, I don't really have any informed basis to deal with curb cut locations and sidewalk openings in the town of Milton. So I just wonder aloud whether this is something that we ought to waive, whether we ought to have the applicant, if we approve the project, that with whatever conditions we impose, have the applicant just go to the town and get this permit. I'm not sure I understand why that would be a big deal, but that's just sort of my rudimentary thinking on this. How do you guys feel about that generally, about some of these very local bylaw provisions? Am I shooting in the dark here?
No. That's occurred to me too. I mean, that's why I mentioned that I thought it had been addressed already. But no, that's what I first sprung to my mind when I read that too, was that why wouldn't it be more appropriate for someone from the town to have that right of approval?
Mike, your thoughts?
I agree with you guys.
Okay. I mean, again, it's not a huge issue, but it just sort of sets a theme for me, which is in some of these like really local things where you have very specific local bylaws to deal with specific issues. I feel somewhat uncomfortable with just sort of blanketly waiving these things without really having any basis to do so. And that takes us logically to the next one, which is removal of trees and stone walls. Apparently in Chapter 8 of the general bylaws, there's regulations that relate to the removal of trees and stone walls. And again, I'm not sure, well, Ted, you pointed out that trees are an issue. And some of the neighbors certainly were very concerned about trees and the removal of trees and the impact of activities on off-site trees, which is not directly related to this provision. But again, I just wonder, we don't have to vote on this tonight, but I just wonder why we wouldn't just leave it to the town and the experts in this area who have dealt with this issue before, presumably. Why wouldn't we just leave it to the town to deal with it? I don't see why that would be such a big deal, but that's my 2 cents on that. That sort of gets us then to the bottom of the first page, which we start to get into the zoning stuff, which is within our bailiwick. And it has to do with basically authorizing uses and accessory uses that are the fundamental part of this application. And so they're asking us to waive that in its entirety, including all the various issues that are listed. I mean, this really goes to the heart of the application. I mean, if we were not to grant this waiver, obviously that would be the end of the application. I'm not sure that we would have a very good basis to deny this particular waiver request, but I'm happy to hear what you guys think.
Well, again, I think, as you said, it depends upon whether the permit were allowed. I mean, if the permit were allowed, I think it's one of the types of things that probably would be waived.
Well, I think it would have to be waived, right?
Yeah.
In order for the permit to be allowed.
We're not ready to do that yet. So.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
But it's an important waiver.
Yeah. Yeah,
And if, yes, Ted, you're right. If we ultimately decided this project is a go, then we necessarily would have to agree to waive those specific provisions of the zoning bylaw. The signs and billboards, I'm really not sure how big of an issue that is, although I'm not sure exactly what the project signage was going to be. But again, if we decided to go with this project, I don't think I would have any difficulty really with waiving this particular provision. But that's, again, it's a big if whether we ultimately decide. You guys have any specific thoughts on signs? No, there being none.
I know, and it says as shown on the project plans, but
I just don't remember.
I think they're probably like locations are shown, but I'm not sure. I don't remember seeing, specific designs for signs. Yeah.
Signs are going to be, the normal type of sign associated with projects like this. There's another reading, but we would want to get. I would want to make sure that there are no, lit up blinking billboards planned for, the entranceway to this and things like that.
Okay. All right, I guess we can move to page 2, which is chapter 10, section 4A, earth materials removal and fill. And the waiver seeks basically waiver of all provisions, the section in its entirety, including technical requirements and permitting procedures, and would leave all issues relating to earth removal and fill to the board under 40B. If you look at the regulations, that specific regulations that we're talking about here, what they cover is, maybe you guys had a chance to look at them yourselves, but they cover methods of removal, dates and hours of operation, routes for transport, distances, some of the issues that we've talked about in terms of how we would deal with all of these trucks and the earth removal and the fill that would be brought to the site. And so it's kind of I think we could either say, no, we're not going to waive this, or I think probably more probably, if we decide to approve the project, that we would, by conditions, effectively deal with all of the issues that the regulations cover. Methods of removal, dates and hours of operation, routes for transport, police details, all the things that we've talked about, which I think would be hugely important. All you have to do is drive down Canton Avenue every day, and you realize how important these kinds of things would be. So I think we could probably, my own view is we could probably waive the specific requirements of this section and address it by virtue of pretty detailed conditions to any approval. Any thoughts on that?
I think I would agree with that. And I think a lot of, not a lot of these, but at least some of them have to be made probably specifically subject to conditions if they're waived, and still have them subject to conditions that might be applicable.
Right. And
one of the conditions would, in this case, would probably be Conservation Commission approval too. So.
Okay, well, we're going to get to the conservation issues in a bit in terms of some of the waivers that are requested.
Right, but I mean, earth material removal and fill is probably something that they would have something to say about, some of that anyway. So.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, I think we could, if we decided to approve this project, I think we could deal with these issues largely through some very specific conditions.
Right.
The next one is wetlands under Chapter 10, Section 4B. There are specific regulations relating to wetland resources. and they seek a waiver of all of these particular regulations in their entirety, and having the project only governed by 40B and the Wetlands Protection Act. So this, I mean, this issue comes up again when we get to specific waiver requests with respect to the Conservation Commission. I'm not really sure how if we waive this, how we would condition it, so we would deal with any wetland resource issues. But I think we can put a place mark on that one until we get to the Conservation Commission one, because quite frankly, I'm not inclined to, when we get there, to waive Conservation Commission review of this project, and they would be, I think, better suited maybe to deal with some of these issues. But we can get to that down the road.
No, I agree with you. I have the extent that wetlands and groundwater, stormwater issues are so huge in this case, and I'm not sure that I feel comfortable waiving this. But again, we can finally decide these.
Right. I mean, I think we all know that the water issues and the wetland resource issues are some of the most difficult issues that we face with this project. And to the extent that we're being asked to jump in and deal with these by waiving everything and not having the Concom involved in this, I think it's a big ask. And anyway, we can come back to that when we get to those specific areas. The next specific one is Chapter 10, Section 5, the height regulations. They want to waive all of these constraints on height in a very specific way. I mean, I think if we didn't grant these, I think we would effectively be denying the project. But and I don't know that there's any rational basis for us to, cut it down to, some lesser number of feet or some lesser number of stories. I don't know how that would work. I don't know how we could fashion that in an intelligent way. So again, this sort of really goes to the whole issue of whether we're going to approve the project. But we are being asked basically to eliminate all height regulations under the zoning bylaw. Thoughts?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, but again, if what is proposed is the way it's constructed, and the waiver is being sought or requested based on those, then if there's a condition in there that the project be built in compliance with the plans or in compliance with those regulations, then I think, as you said, it's something that we probably would have to grant if we were granting the permit.
Yeah, I mean, just because, Ted, I just don't think we'd be in a position to sort of redesign this project, right, by saying, okay, no, it can only be X number of feet or X number of stories. I mean, I think if we were at that point, I think more logically, we would just simply deny the project rather than try to reshape it. At least that's the sort of way. I just don't think we would be in a position to do that. So that's going to be this is going to be part of the whole question about whether we think we can approve this project generally, which we will get to later. But I think the height regulation issue kind of brings all of that into focus, I think. If we turn to page 3, the next requested waiver relates to Chapter 10, Section 6, which are other dimensional regulations, including lot area, setbacks, building coverage, gross floor area, open area, etc. And in many instances, it looks as if they meet those requirements, particularly once they merge the two parcels together. There are some areas where they go above max gross floor area, by way of example. But again, this is one of those situations, I think, that if we're going to approve the project, then in all likelihood, we're going to approve the waivers, because there's really no rational basis for us to sort of change it, I don't think. But that really goes to the heart of whether or not we're going to approve the project.
I got to agree with that.
Any other thoughts?
No, I think I'd agree with that. I mean, in some cases, I'm not sure whether this is one of them. It says construction deemed to constitute a building or structure. We know what a building is, I think. Structure. You know, as to whether or not. Well, there were some. This isn't the one I'm thinking of. There was one that I thought it was too broad in its use of the word structure, but this isn't it, so I won't.
Okay.
Comment on it.
All right. So again, I think this is one of those where maybe we can tweak it to some extent, but I think this goes to the heart of whether or not we're going to approve. Anyway, we'll come back to that eventually. On page 4, we have some very specific zoning provisions relating to buildings in front yards and buildings in side yards. They seek waiver of all of these provisions of the zoning bylaw, which governs required distances from front lines, covers the issue of ground coverage, the same for side yards, and very specific provisions of the zoning bylaw. And I know particularly things like building and side yards, I know these are issues that are of considerable importance, certainly to the Holmes Lane side of the proposed project and also on the other side. Again, that kind of these requests for waivers really, again, sort of go to the heart of whether or not we approve the plan generally. And so that's something we'll have to come back to. But anyway, and that's why I think this is a helpful way to do this, because it's really highlighting for us how many things we're going to have to deal with in making the decision as to whether or not to approve the plan. Okay, page 5. Again, it's this time it's the buildings in the rear yards. It's sort of the same issue. They need complete waiver of these very specific provisions relating to real distance to real lot lines and ground coverage, height limitations in the rear yards. Again, it's very specific issues. I know these are issues of considerable concern and import to the neighbors. And again, it goes, once again, not to repeat myself, but it kind of goes to the essence of the question of whether or not we eventually vote to approve this plan. Parking regulations, again, a complete waiver is sought. Again, it's one of these situations where if we approve the plan, it seems to me we probably are going to end up approving the waiver, because I'm not sure that there's a rational basis for us to change the number of parking spaces or whatnot. So again, I think it goes to the essence of our mission here. Chapter 10, Section 8A, having to do with the enforcement of the bylaw and the issuance of building permits. And so essentially they're saying, we want you, DBA, to issue the building permits. And again, this is one of those waivers that if we approve the plan, it just kind of goes along with it. That there's no way for it to work otherwise, unless we gave that waiver. That gets us over to page 6.
Sorry, Brian, could you go through, I was making some notes. Can you?
Okay.
Go over what you said about 14 again. So that means,
Sorry.
that would mean that the building commissioner would not have to approve it.
Right, exactly. We would step in and do that. Is that troublesome? It sounds daunting for us to be issuing building permits, but that's the way I read that waiver request. But again, Ted, I think that gets subsumed in the greater issue.
So I mean, I read that section, and it talks about the building inspector having all of these, building commissioner having these powers and duties under the ordinance. So the comprehensive permit then would provide that we would be issuing it.
I believe that's the case. I mean, we could check with Judy Barron on that, and maybe with town council, but that's the way I read it.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, we're going to come back to all these anyway.
Yep. Submission of plots. I think that would probably necessarily be waived if we would decide to approve the plan. It's sort of a technical requirement. So that in essence, we would be approving the plans, and the construction would go forward in accordance with those plans that we approve. So,
so is it standard? I'm sorry, go ahead. Finish.
Go ahead, Ted.
I was going to say, is it standard for something like this, normally reasonable conformance or substantial conformance?
I can't answer that question. I'm not sure.
That's the only question I had about it.
It's a very lawyerly question. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll get to that someday.
Okay.
Again, certificates of occupancy that would typically be done by another department of the town, but here they're asking essentially that we would be the ones that yes, we'd issue occupancy permits. Or certainly there would be a waiver with respect to the specific provisions of the zoning bylaw.
Right, and I think this would be another one that would be, the waiver would take effect once the conditions are satisfied. Right. Once all the conditions are satisfied.
I think that's right. Site plan approval.
Can I just ask one question about certificate of occupancy? Doesn't that allow the building inspector to approve the project once developed, right, and ensure that it's compliant with the plans as drawn, as opposed to just approving that it's compliant with the zoning bylaw? I mean, doesn't it take into account, doesn't the occupancy permit take into account things like safety and fitness for use and things like that?
Yeah, Mike, I would have to, I must admit, I
yeah,
don't.
That's after it's built. That's after it's built and before
right.
You can occupy it. Yeah. Right.
So you would want to keep that requirement, wouldn't you?
I'm sorry.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Mike.
I'm sorry, hold on, let me.
Yeah, it's a good question. We'll have to think about that a little bit and go back and read that section of the zoning bylaw again. But maybe we just don't waive that. Maybe that's the easiest way to do that.
Well, I really didn't hear the question.
Sorry, so I fixed my microphone. So the zoning bylaw, I'm just reading the zoning bylaw first, just to make sure I understand it. Okay, so I'm mistaken. So it does not take into account things like safety and fitness for use. The building commissioner, it requires the building commissioner to ensure that the building conforms to the statute and bylaws relating to construction and occupancy. So I think that that's different from what I was thinking, and we should probably just discuss it later.
Okay.
Okay.
But now that you've read it, it raises a question on my mind. But again, we can take this up later. But so if say this, we grant a comprehensive permit and impose the conditions that we want to impose, and let's assume that they go forward and they build it and they get to the point where they're done and now they're wanting to get occupancy permits. Is this saying that they don't have to get occupancy permits, or
That's the way that I read it.
and why would that be a good thing? why wouldn't we want the building inspector to take a look and make sure it was
Mr. Chair, can I chime in here real quick?
sure?
These are all things that are subject to the state building code in terms of building permits and occupancy permits, and those
Right.
are unwaivable. So there is no, I think that these waivers could have been perhaps, I think, worded a little bit more clearly. But my take and my read on the particular one that we're talking about, I'm on my phone, so unfortunately it's really small. But I mean,
Okay.
so you look at the waiver of Chapter 10, Section 8A on
8C.
enforcement.
Okay.
The one where it says a waiver is sought for this section in its entirety with respect to enforcement of the above provisions of the zoning bylaw for which waivers have been requested. So I think what that one is getting at is we've waived all of these other things, but we don't want to get caught up with the building inspector then trying to enforce things that have already been waived. So it strikes me as kind of like a belt and suspenders thing of
Okay.
like, we've waived this, and then also we've waived the building commissioner's ability to enforce only the things that have been waived. That's the way
Okay.
that I read that.
So just as
But
a practical, just so Tim, so I understand this. So the project's built, and do they need occupancy certificates? I assume that they do, right?
They absolutely do.
And so what you're saying is that the building inspector would be able to look at whatever issues he looks at in connection with the issuance of occupancy certificates, but he couldn't rely on anything in denying an occupancy certificate, which was the subject of a specific waiver we had granted.
So the occupancy, well, I don't want to get too far over my skis here, but the building commissioner has kind of wears two hats at the same time. He's the zoning enforcement officer, and he's also the enforcement officer of the building code.
Right.
And when we talk about building permits, we talk about occupancy permits, that's really more in the realm of the state building code, which, like I said,
Right.
is a state regulation, unwaivable. That is what it is. To the extent that any of the zoning waivers create a conflict with the state building code, I don't know if they would, but the state building code always trumps.
It always trumps
anything like that.
Okay. So if you went to the building inspector, he would make sure that it complied with the building code, and any waivers that we had granted would have no bearing on that.
Yes. And just to sort of put your mind at ease about another comment, nobody wants you to issue building permits or occupancy permits. Nobody wants that.
Right.
And you won't be expected to do that. In fact, I think there's a presumption that when these waivers and when the eventual conditions are written, references to the board. I mean, the building commissioner is going to act as your agent in a lot of this stuff. So you'll have some, you'll figure out what you want, whatever you want to do in terms of how hands-on you want of kind of oversight of this. But the building commissioner, as in any kind of variance or special permit, is kind of your hands on the wheel of the approval.
Okay.
And then Brian, I just had one more kind of just comment from way back, the discussion of the first waiver of the right-of-way regulations. I just wanted to we kind of dealt with this question for the 582 Blue Hill Ave approval. And, obviously it's a different project, but they spent, 30 hearings doing this. So maybe there's some lessons to be learned. And what we wound up, because we dealt with the director of public works on this, because he had actually raised the flag about that particular condition, because that condition deals with that one, and there's another one further down that deal with DPW's ability to certify drain layers and to just be able to inspect projects that go into the street. My understanding of that waiver, and there's another one that you'll recognize kind of towards the end, is our regulations and our bylaws basically say that the select board issues the permit. In practice, that authority has kind of been delegated down to the director of public works. And so what that waiver is asking for is basically, waiving the letter of the regulation, but kind of keeping the spirit of it. So the 582 approval has a condition that's been worded in a way that basically keeps all of the teeth and all of the substance of DPW's inspection, review, approval of all of that right-of-way stuff, but just takes out the kind of the need to go to a separate board for a permit. And I think that's kind of the stance toward a lot of these waiver requests and the conditions that will kind of come forth from those, is that it's not necessarily about skirting the actual kind of substance of, everyone wants the DPW director and the town engineer to inspect the pipes, that are going in. No one's saying that we shouldn't do that. It's more about the need to go before another board for another permit or another approval is really kind of what a lot of these waivers are about. So I'll let you guys continue this conversation, but I think, some of these are kind of similar to other waivers and other conditions that have been requested. And a little bit of work and thought has gone into these as well. So that might be helpful to help guide your conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with the nuts and bolts of how these permits are handed out, and I certainly wasn't aware that that this had sort of been informally delegated to the DPW. So it just looked to me like it was a Milton Select Board permit. But thank you for clearing that out for us. Okay, I think we were at 10.8D, which is site plan approval. Am I right? Is that where we stopped?
Yes.
Yes.
And so they're seeking a complete waiver of site plan approval and instead having it be permanent under 40B. I think if I were to approve this, I would be okay with this. Having gone through months and months of hearings and pages and pages of documents submitted to the board, I think we would probably be the logical people to deal with, and we will deal with site plan issues. And so I think it would be unnecessarily duplicative to require separately site plan approval under the zoning bylaw. But I defer to you guys on how you feel about that.
I agree. I think it's pretty central to what our job is here.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm on now, by the way, if it's any help.
Judy, it's always a help to have you on.
I was in another meeting, I'm sorry.
Only to have the spirit of your presence, it's helpful. Judy, what we had decided to do, and actually we had talked about during the last meeting, was just going through and talking sort of generally about the list of requested waivers,
Right.
which I think it's been a good approach, because I think it's informing us more generally about sort of some major issues as we focus on these specific items. Mm-hmm. And so we've been through them. We haven't voted on specifically whether or not we would grant the waivers, but we certainly talked about how each of us thinks about the requests, and we're gonna go through and finish that. And then once we get through that process, we can check and have you join with us on what's logical for us to do next.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, and Kim is on, and he's been very helpful because some of this stuff is very local.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to get that sort of local flavor to what's being requested here. Okay, that brought us to the notice requirements, which seem to be pretty technical, and I think probably we would be okay with waiving notice requirements. Ted, Mike, do you agree?
Yeah, it does provide for notice pursuant to Chapter 40B, I guess, and the regs under it.
Right.
And as long as that's as long as some notice is provided, then
yeah, I mean, I think
maybe the idea is to avoid duplicating notice from both.
Yeah, I think that is the idea. Okay, the next one is Chapter 10, Roman 9C, special permits or other permits. Basically, I think it's saying we don't need to get any other permits. We don't need to get zoning permits, special permits, or other permits. That all permitting will be within the context of the 40B program, which makes sense to me. I mean, that's the whole purpose of 40B is to sort of combine all of these permitting things into one category and having a Board of Appeals deal with that. So I think that's a logical and necessary waiver. Any thoughts on that?
Great.
No, we're not voting on them, we're just talking about it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that, Ted. I mean, it just seems to me, just to jump ahead, it seems to me at some point we're going to have to vote on whether or not we think we're going to approve the plan. And if we vote to approve the plan, then I think we have to go back and then definitively deal with some of these specific issues. But we're obviously not there yet. I think this next one, the Milton Wetlands Bylaw, Chapter 15, and so they want us to waive all requirements relating to wetlands and to basically obviate any local permit that would be issued by the Milton Conservation Commission. And I don't know how you guys feel, but I wrote notes in the margins of all these. My initial reaction was to say, why wouldn't we just let the Conservation Commission do its job here? There's some very important issues relating to water and water flow on this project. And why wouldn't we let the experts decide whether or not there was impacts to wetland resources? And it seems like the Conservation Commission would be uniquely qualified to do that. So my initial reaction to this was to say, why not have a separate permit from the Milton Conservation Commission? But I know that sort of goes against the whole idea of 40B, that you put out all these permits into one pot. But given the magnitude of the water issues here, it just makes me uncomfortable to just kind of usurp the power and expertise of the Milton Conservation Commission in dealing with these important issues. But that's just one man's thinking on this. Thoughts, gentlemen?
I'm going to want to look more closely at the entire wetlands bylaw.
Okay.
I mean, I tend to agree with you, since water is a primary concern here. I'm uncomfortable waiving this. I think I would be uncomfortable waiving this, but I want to look at it a little more closely.
No, I think, Mike, I think you make a good point. I think it would be a good idea. And I did not have a chance to do that before this session this evening, to look specifically at what we would be waiving and what the specific requirements applicable to wetlands are under the Milton Wetlands Bylaw. And I think we would have to do that before we actually voted on the waiver of this condition. But it just, to me, it just underscores my overall concern about water issues and about sort of usurping the power and expertise of established boards and commissions who have some experience with water issues far more than I do. So anyway, we can come back to that one, and I agree with you. I think I'm going to have to take a careful look at the specific provisions, so I know exactly what it is that we would be waiving. I haven't had a chance to do that yet. Judy, any thoughts on that?
In terms of the wetlands issue, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I think, the board sits in the position of the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board and any
Right.
other entity that has local permitting that would otherwise apply. So my only question is, do you feel that you have adequate input from the Conservation Commission in the record to help you determine whether the important requirements of the local wetlands bylaw have been met? Because if they have, the applicant still has to go to them, as I know you know this, but they still have to go under 131, section 40. That authority doesn't transfer to you guys. It's simply the local bylaw. But did they weigh in?
Under the state act, they still have to go in, right? I understand that.
That's right, because it's a state permit and that is not subsumed by the comprehensive permit. But I guess the question is, did they provide enough input to the board during the hearing process for you to know whether the requested waiver is problematic for a technical reason? I think that's the question I would probably want to answer if I were sitting in your shoes.
Okay, I don't know that we had any guidance from the Conservation Commission. Did we, Mike or Tim, Ted?
I mean, I think this note here in the request says a lot, that the project will comply with the 25-foot no disturb zone set forth in section 11 of this bylaw, and which indicates to me that they're saying that it shouldn't apply anyway, because we're not going to disturb that zone. But I'm not really remembering anything from the Conservation Commission, I want to look through my notes to make sure that there's no further discussion of this in the hearings or in the comments, but I think that's my understanding.
It's mine too.
Mike, I don't remember the Concom giving us any specific information with respect to issues that we might be
We
concerned
can
with.
talk about this again when we're ready to vote on these things.
Yeah,
Okay.
If we are at some point going to vote on them.
Okay. Okay, and that brings us to the sort of a related provision under the Milton Stormwater Management Bylaw. If I'm reading this correctly, it looks like a waiver is not required here. Is that right? Although it seems a little bit.
Notes. Sorry.
Go ahead, Ted. I'm sorry.
I have in my notes that Jesse said he was not requesting a waiver as to this.
Okay. I had a similar note, but I wasn't sure. Okay. Okay, that makes that one easy. Okay, I guess that puts us on to page 8. Demolition of buildings deemed historically significant. And a specific, I guess there's a specific chapter of the town bylaws, chapter 22, that deals with demolition of historically significant buildings. I don't remember talking about historic significance during any of the public hearings. Do either of you gentlemen remember that?
I have a memory of in one of the recent hearings discussing it. And I don't have the bylaw in front of me, but I believe that it requires a 1 or 2 year demolition delay. And I don't know if we discussed it during our last deliberation or if it was actually during the hearing.
There was a letter from the Historical Commission in the early part of the
That may be what it is. That might be what I'm remembering.
Well, no, yeah, I mean, it has been mentioned at times throughout that it's of historical significance. So,
Okay. And what, I mean, what, do you have any thoughts on this request for waiver?
not at this juncture, no. I mean, it sounds like we're, unless all of us have read the letter. I was looking for it here because I didn't misquote what it said, but I can't put my hands on it right now. I've got so many things out here on the table.
Yeah, I agree.
Again, if we reach the point where we have to talk about it, we can deal with it then.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember that there was a letter. I don't remember exactly what it said, but I'll have to go back and look at it.
Oh, wait a second. I do have the letter.
Okay.
Opposed to the development. It talks about the five homes in the area were built between 1767 and 1927, occupied by members of prominent Milton families, including the Colonial Revival residence at 648 Canton Avenue, built in 1891 by J. Porter Holmes, who was elected Milton's town treasurer for the first quarter of the 20th century. And his son Henry was Milton's fire chief for 25 years. The house is finally built and has been superbly maintained. And then it goes on to talk about removal of stone walls and trees and that it's interest in preserving structures and other items that it talks about in the letter. And I don't want to, but we can all, if you can't put your hands on it, I mean, it's probably on the website, right?
I would think so.
Yeah.
I know that's where I saw it. I'm having trouble finding it now, but I'm sure I'll.
Yeah, we can find it. Ted, who's the letter from? The historic district?
Historical Commission, I believe.
Yeah.
Historical Commission. Stephen V. O'Donnell, chair.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were saying they were opposed?
Yes.
Opposed to the demolition of the main house on the property.
Opposed to the development at 648 Canton Avenue, I think in part because of, the house would be removed and other nearby properties which are viewed as being historical in nature would be adversely affected.
Okay.
As well as stone walls and trees and,
Okay.
But
I'll have to go
whole,
back on.
that whole area of houses has historical significance because, early prominent members of Milton lived in the area. So.
Okay. Well, I'll go back and find the letter, but
I'm having trouble putting my hands on it right now. Does it say anything? Is the property been inventoried? Is it on Macris? Did they say anything about that?
Sorry, but I do not believe so.
Okay.
No, I didn't see that when I read it before.
Okay.
The letter does reference a Macris number. It says the Vos Shepherd
Oh, it
Homes.
does. No, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
NLT
You're right.
number 6.
I missed that. Yeah.
okay.
Thank you, Tim.
Well,
Thank you.
I think we all need to take a close look at the letter, but Judy, in any of the other 40Bs, have we run across historically significant buildings?
Yeah, it came up with 582 Blue Hill Ave, and we
Okay.
brought in a historic preservation consultant at the board's request to review that project and provide some advice. And much of the advice she provided ultimately was incorporated into the application. I mean, you know, in the perfect world, probably one would have preferred not to see any change on the site, but if that was going to happen, then I think her role was to advise the board on, you know, ways to, for lack of a better term, mitigate some of the adverse impact on the historic resource.
Right. But on that one, on 582, there wasn't a complete tear down though of the building, right? I mean,
It was going to be.
Okay.
The project was completely revised to incorporate much of the existing home. And to protect the gardens on the site, which was probably the biggest issue. I hate to put it that way, but that was a significant issue.
Gardens?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have the letter here. It's on the website. It references both the homes in the area. There's a Macris number,
Great, thank you.
as well as the fact that Canton Ave is apparently a scenic route under Massachusetts general laws.
Which is why that one of the requested waivers is relates to a provision that applies to scenic highways, scenic roads.
Scenic roads, yes.
Scenic roads, yeah.
Say that again, Ted.
One of the provisions that we've already talked about. Let's see if I can find it. The one regarding the removal of trees and stone walls in Milton town ways,
Right.
applies to scenic roads. It refers to that town of Milton provision refers to a state statute, which is applies to scenic roads.
Right.
Okay. Well, we'll have to come back to this one, depending on what we do. Mike or Ted, anything you want to say further about that at this point? No?
Well, thank you.
Milton right-of-way regulations, Milton DBW Division 2. Just trying to read this. So this would have been a permit from the selectmen that would deal with, among other things, utility locations in the rights of way, etc. Tim, is this one of those things whereby sort of local custom this has been given to the Department of Public Works?
Yeah, that's the other one that I was talking about.
Okay. Okay. And again, I guess one of the thoughts I have in my mind is why would we do this? Why would we grant this waiver? Even if we approve, why not let the Department of Public Works do its job and looking at utility locations and the like. I'm not sure we know enough about it to really have a good handle on it. But I don't know, is this a waiver that's typically granted, Judy?
Which one is this, Mr. Chair? I'm looking at
This
your
is-
screen and the waiver list,
All
and
right.
I'm getting a little confused.
So I'm on page 8 of the 10 pages of.
Yes, sir. Yep.
And it's the bottom one. It says Division 2, which is just a section of this particular provision. And it gives the Department of Public Works has to approve utilities in rights of way. And I guess my question that I wrote to myself was, why would we want to do this? Why would we want to waive this? Why not have the experts make sure that everything is cool with this?
Did they provide comments on this?
So, Judy, excuse me, Mr. Chair, can I,
Yeah.
through you, Judy, this is one of the, if you remember, we went over this in 582.
Yep.
And that waiver kind of specifically says, subject to compliance with any and all applicable state and or federal law,
Yeah.
as well as the performance standards of these regulations.
Yes.
So the performance standards are the thing that DPW is most concerned with. And again, this is another waiver that is just requesting the waiver of the requirement to go before the select board
Yeah.
to issue a permit. But the condition itself would include, verbatim the language and the performance standards in the in that particular regulation. So
Okay.
DPW would still have every
Review.
ability under this permit, if that's the way the condition's written, to do what they would normally do. It's just there's no actual additional permit given. It's just all under the comprehensive permit.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think it would be helpful. I know, Judy, if we were to grant approval of this, you would probably take a first hand at drafting a decision and probably in drafting conditions. And I'm sure you would, to some extent, use 582 as a template for that. Okay.
One other thing I think we would have to talk about is I have in my notes from when these were discussed at the hearing. I think it was a notes from Jesse's comments that the waiver would be sought with respect to both Canton Avenue and Mergewood. Doesn't say that.
No, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't say it where, Ted.
Well, in the waiver request, it doesn't mention the road specifically, but it does, maybe he's interpreting it broadly to include any.
I don't remember one way or the other whether there was any proposal to put utilities in Mergewood, was there?
I don't either, but I think that's what it said. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember any either.
Okay. All right. Well, this is something, if we decide to do it, I guess we have a good precedent for it that Judy can incorporate into any decision. And we can certainly take advantage of what I know is a lot of hard work on the 582 and sort of crib from conditions and whatnot that they have in that decision. All right, that brings us to number 9. And this is just a waiver request completely of basically of the local wetlands bylaw. And was this a waiver that was sought in 582, Judy?
I'm pretty sure it must have been. I mean, I don't have that decision open right now, but it looks,
No, I
there's a lot of
understand.
similarity between the two
Well, I'm
waiver
sure.
lists. So again, they're asking for a waiver to have to get a separate permit.
Right.
Yeah, I opened up 582. I do not see that in 582.
I'll have to go back and read it again, Ted. Between that and now, there's been 2 other decisions, and Lord only knows. I have to go back and look. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I'd like to see how we handled it, how the board handled it in other cases.
Well, the specific language that's mentioned, the additional waiver sought for section 6 of the regulations in the specific text, the commission may also find that protection of the interests identified in the bylaw require that an applicant meet additional standards. And that failure to meet both the state standards and such additional standards as may be required by the commission will result in the commission's denial of an application. By setting forth in this section 6 certain specific standards, the commission does not intend to limit or restrict the adoption of additional or different standards. So I don't know that I'd feel comfortable doing that before.
So Ted, I think the waiver from the local wetlands bylaw is in the 582 decision.
Oh, it is? Well, maybe I'm missing a page of it.
Well, this has been through a couple of drafts, but I'm looking at page 43 in that decision.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Well, this is the Conservation Commission rules and regulations. So the one that we're talking about now, and the other ones were the wetlands bylaws. I think those may be different. These are the waiver request here says local rules and regulations of the Milton Conservation Commission.
Well, that's also it's on page 45.
Four, five. Okay. Yeah, it says, well, on page 45, at least the one I'm looking at, on the regulations, it has sections 4, 5, 7, 8, and 10.
Yes.
Right. Okay, and this one in the request this time says a waiver is additionally sought for section 6. So, and the one in 582 didn't include section 6. It looks like it just included 4, 5, 7, 8, and 10.
But doesn't it approve waivers of those other sections elsewhere in that decision, like 43, page 43, 44? Section 6 is approved on page 46. This is the first time I'm looking at this decision, so I don't know if I'm reading it correctly, but it just seems to be a different. It seems like the requests were worded differently in that.
Well, I think the requests were somewhat different. I mean, it's a different project, so I'm not really surprised.
Right.
I was answering more globally. I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question. I was just commenting more globally that there are waivers.
Sorry. You're right. I missed that one quickly when I was looking for it here. Well, maybe water wasn't as big an issue in 582. Judy, you might know, but I don't. But it's a pretty big issue here.
Yeah, I do understand that, Ted. Believe me, I'm not saying that just because a different panel did something on a project, you should do the same. I'm just saying that I think the waiver of the regulations was part of that discussion.
Right. No, and I agree, but certainly we can look at it and it may inform us to some extent. And we may decide to go in a different way, but I think rather than reinventing the wheel on some of this stuff, I think it would be helpful to see what was done in the other case. And I haven't looked at that decision in quite a while. I think water is an issue at that place, but it's really kind of a different water issue.
It's a different water issue. I agree.
It's more surface water and where surface water is going to go, and because it's at the top of a kind of a steep rise, and it's got some factors that aren't really generally applicable here, but I think it'll be helpful to look at that. So yeah, I haven't looked at that decision in a while, and I'm going to take over the weekend. I'm going to take a chance to just read through it carefully. So, okay, so we can come back to this one.
There were wetlands waivers in the Ice House case too.
Okay. All right, that brings us to page 10. There's rules and regulations with respect to comprehensive permit applications. I don't think that's really a big issue. I assume they probably always ask for that.
They do.
They probably did in 582 as well. So I don't think that's not really a substantive issue. I don't think.
Right.
That brings us then to back to the subdivision rules and regulations. And basically, it's waiving A&R approval not required, approval creation and approval of an approval not required plan. In that we would deal with that issue by virtue of our decision under this under the act. Again, I don't think that's a big deal. And then the last one,
the planning board would, I think.
The planning board would do an A&R endorsement.
Right. Yeah.
And then finally, and this one, I found this one sort of intriguing. Other approval permits. So there's, and I haven't read any of these permits, but there apparently historically there's been several ZBA decisions relating to this property, 53, 55, and 57. And they're asking us basically to amend those decisions and to release any conditions that would be necessary to authorize the use of Mergewood Road. And have you ever seen anything like this, Judy, before?
There have certainly been situations where the board was asked to go into another approval or a bylaw and essentially waive factors that might affect an adjoining property.
Okay.
I read these several months ago. They were, I think they were attachments to a memorandum that Ned filed.
Yeah.
But it was, it was a few months ago, I think, when it was filed. So.
Okay. I mean, it just gives me pause that we would.
You can do that. I mean, I don't think there's any question that you can do that. Whether you want to do it or whether it's a wise thing to do is a matter for the board. But I don't really think there's an issue about your ability under the comprehensive permit law to do what they're asking. The wisdom of it is, is a policy issue for you guys to vet.
Okay. All right. Well, I got to go back and read those 4 decisions. More to read over the weekend. So that brings us kind of to a close of these requested waivers. But interestingly, it ends on with Mergewood Road as one of the issues. And Ted, I think you would raise an issue about Mergewood Road earlier in the discussion this evening.
Well, I said it was one of the issues when I rattled off the list that I had made of the issues that I did a longer list, Judy, and I had read it at the beginning of issues and acknowledged that I probably had missed some, but I had started it the other night but hadn't finished it. And then in the last couple of days, I did a more comprehensive listing of issues that had been raised by neighbors and also persons who live down gradient from the property and even across Canton Avenue, because I think we've had a couple of them as well.
Right.
Their speaker file letters.
I mean, just on the subject of Mergewood Road, I mean, it seems to me that clearly we will have a condition if we were to grant a permit that says, I mean, and I don't think this is in dispute. I mean, that the secondary access is required and it's going to be over Mergewood Road. And sort of implicit in that condition is that they have a right to use it. And to the extent there's a challenge to their ability to use it for that purpose, I don't think that's something that we can decide. I think we can condition it to say it has to be Mergewood. You have to have a second. It has to be over Mergewood. And if there's an issue about whether or not they can use Mergewood, I think that's for someone else to decide. I don't know if you guys disagree with me on that, but
I agree with you.
Yeah. Agree.
mean, I get it. I mean, I understand the issue. I understand the whole question of overburdening of, easement rights, and I get it, but I don't think that's an issue that we can decide. So all we can do is say, you got to have merge with, it's got to be available. If it's not available, basically you're not meeting a very important condition of this permit, and that's that. So I think that's all we can say about that. Okay, well, I mean, I find this very helpful and informative tonight. Obviously, we got to go back through these. We'll have to go back through these requested waivers again in some more detail, and we've got some homework to do based on some of the discussion here tonight. I'd just like to talk generally about so we have a hearing, I think, on Monday at 5. Is that right?
Think so.
That's
Yes,
right. Yeah.
the next one's Monday at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Is it at 5 so that we can make room for other hearings in town, or are we planning to go for like 4 hours?
I think it's the former, but I could be wrong about that.
That's up to you guys.
No, but Crystal, we didn't do 7 because that slot wasn't open, right?
Yeah, Mondays, I don't know, it just looked like there's a lot that's been going on Mondays. But do you want it to be 7 o'clock or?
I don't care. I mean, 5's fine.
Okay.
And Mike, if your question is, can we stick around, do 4 hours and go from 5 to 9? Sure. If that's what you want, we'll do that.
I'm just planning my Monday night. That's all.
Okay. So let's talk about what's our next step here. Obviously, this was preliminary tonight in terms of these conditions. Some homework to be done. One of the most important things for me to do is to read the 582 decision, which I did once a long time ago, but it's a faint memory for me now, so I'll go back to that. But what do you think is the next productive thing that we can do? It seems to me.
Okay,
I'm sorry. No, please.
So with the East Milton case, which is also going through deliberations right now, the board asked me to take a stab at drafting a decision, run it by the peer review consultants, get their input on conditions that should be in it, unique to that project, and basically leave some blanks in the decision, which is how many units are you approving, and those things that you still have to resolve, but to at least get like the procedural history down and at least the jurisdictional findings. Obviously, I can't write the findings of fact yet because I don't quite know where your heads are on this. I mean, I could take a stab at it, but maybe to start to just put the skeleton together of a decision. And while you continue to discuss these kind of big issues, I could at least be doing that. And it might make sense to do that just because the timeline kind of gets away from us on this 40 days.
I don't disagree. And that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's premature to do anything substantive other than like skeletal things, as you say, like, the plans we're dealing with, the facts and things like that. I mean,
right.
Ted, I agree, but I don't think it's premature to get input from the peer review consultants about conditions they would recommend.
Not at all. Right? And
I can certainly do that.
If at the end of the day, Ted, we voted to turn this thing down in its entirety, then, so be it. We're not going to be constrained by the fact that that someone's been working on this, on the basics of an approval decision.
One of the hardest things I ever had to do for another board was to draft an approval decision and a denial decision. So the board had both in front of them. That was a fascinating intellectual exercise.
I don't think we're there yet, but I guess that leads me to my question. I mean, do we need to get to that issue?
Which issue?
Sooner rather than later, the issue of whether we're inclined to approve with conditions or we're inclined not to.
Well, I think you're going to have to get there pretty soon.
Yeah. That was my long-winded and roundabout way of saying, should we take that issue up on Tuesday? I guess it's Monday at 5.
Monday. I think you need to start grappling with it. I do.
Because I mean, so we've been through the waivers, and we have a pretty good sense of where we are there with some further information necessary, so that I think we have a pretty good feel for if we were to vote to grant, and hopefully Judy has a pretty good sense of which you would put in a decision with respect to waivers if we went that way. But rather than begin to talk about conditions, which we could do, it seems to me that we would probably be better off to have a candid discussion about how we feel about approval and or disapproval of the plan. And I'd be happy to take that up on Monday at 5.
I think it's a good idea.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have to rest up for the weekend and read all the stuff that I promised to read. And we'll meet at 5 o'clock on Monday. This has been very helpful. Thank you all. Ted and Mike for your input, and Judy, as always, you always give us sage wisdom on these difficult issues. So we'll come back on Monday and we'll go to the difficult task of discussing approval or disapproval of the plan. Anything further anyone wanted to discuss?
So
Okay.
in terms of scheduling, we're set through what, April 12th, is it? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
okay. We have 3 hearings between now and then. We have
Right.
Monday, Thursday, and then the following Tuesday.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Ted, that's why I think I need to start getting something at least
Absolutely.
skeletal
I mean,
drafted.
I don't know about anyone else, but I'm going to be away that April vacation week. My whole crew, grandchildren and children, we're all going to Florida for the week. So, I think I'd like to see us get as much done as we can over these next 3 hearings. And I think we'll go a long way toward doing that on Monday when we talk about the vote up or down with respect to this proposal.
If you're
But it is
going
a-
to Florida with grandchildren, you're going to be dying to have a meeting with your colleagues in a hotel room where it's quiet by about 6 o'clock at night. Just saying.
Yeah, I don't think so, Trudy. Maybe you could be right, but I don't think so.
Is that the week of the 18th? Is that?
Yes, it's school vacation week.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I have 4 grandchildren I'm bringing to Florida. You may be right, Judy. Maybe this will look
You're a
pretty
crazy
good.
dude. I'm just telling you.
Anyway, all right. So we'll work out on Monday. We'll take as long as we need to have a fulsome discussion about whether or not we're going to approve this plan, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Judy.
much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Crystal.
See you Monday.
Take
Okay.
care.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.